I'm Cynthia Nichols, the Regional Public Engagement Specialist at the U.S. Embassy in Kyiv. Thanks for joining us today on Views from Ukraine, where we're going to be talking about the military buildup on the border. After 45 minutes, our panelists are going to go into private breakout rooms to have further discussions with the media in attendance. Please remember, the panel is being recorded, but the breakout sessions are not. All conversations are on the record. If you are in the main Zoom session, please remember to mute your microphones and turn off your camera. And now I'm going to hand it over to the press attaché for the U.S. Embassy in Kyiv, Dan Langenkamp. Dan?
Thank you, Cynthia. More than 100,000 troops on Ukraine's border, in and around Ukraine. It's been described as a hostage taking or akin to having a gun to Ukraine's head. Tonight we'll be talking with three experts about the security situation in this country. We will be talking first of all with Andriy Zagorodnyuk, a former Minister of Defense from 2019 to 2020, currently the chairman of the Center for Defense Strategies, Sasha Danilyuk, the chairman of the Ukrainian Center for Defense Reforms, and a former chief advisor to Ukraine's Minister of Defense, and Ilya Ponomarenko, a defense and security reporter at the Kyiv Independent. He has reported about the war in eastern Ukraine since the conflict's early days. Now, we will have Andriy for only 30 minutes, so we'll focus a little bit more on him during these first few minutes of the program. Our first question is, what objectively are we seeing now in terms of the Russian military buildup? Andriy, what are we seeing? What is there right now? It looks like we're having connection problems with Andriy. Sasha, how about over to you? What are we seeing in terms of the military buildup around Ukraine?
I think that to understand the real intent of Russian activities, we have to see the big picture, and that's why, of course, all of that, military activities and concentration of Russian troops on our borders are important. But without seeing what's going on in other dimensions, it's completely useless. So from my point of view, Russia is trying to play two strategic games, both of which based on the deceptive nation of Russian hybrid war. Mm-hmm. First, it's actually attempt to use that military power on and military threat on our borders as a tool of coercive diplomacy to force the West and Ukraine, of course, as a result, to actually implement Russian version of so-called Minsk agreements into Ukrainian legislation, which means to recognize that puppet republics organized by Russian occupation in Donbass. And the second is to use this fact to destabilize situation in Ukraine, because we have to admit that this recognition of Russian-controlled territories would be never accepted by the most active part of the Ukrainian society, and to use that destabilization for similar scenario to 2014. So destabilization and military invasion after that, because using that destabilization in Kiev, Russians could organize violent protests led by Ukrainian veterans and far-right organizations, and to use that as a not only trigger but also justification of the invasion.
So you're saying that there could be more than one goal here. One could be to sort of negotiate, to force concessions on a negotiation, but also there could be a real threat. There's a real threat of invasion as well.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that actually this goal with implementation of Minsk agreement is not the final goal. It's actually the creation of preconditions for that internal destabilization, which will be used maybe for real coup with real decapitation of Ukrainian leadership. Of course, using false flag and claiming that assassinations would be conducted by Ukrainian patriots. And in that situation, Russians, even with that limited number of troops, because again, despite it's a huge number for Europeans, it's still probably 2 times less than Ukraine has in our army, and this is not enough. But in the case of decapitation and complete disorganization of system of command and control, in such case, it would be enough.
So let's get into these scenarios in a minute. It looks like we have Mr. Zagorodniuk, Andrei, on the line.
Hello. Good
Andrei,
evening.
are you here?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay,
Do you hear
great.
me?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so our first question was, what are we seeing in and around Ukraine? What is the sort of military security situation? Could you give us a summary of that? From your
Yes,
perspective?
we have essentially a constant movement of the equipment. The equipment statistics is pretty much as was described by reports from Ministry of Defense. I mean, they're quite accurate. We see around 120,000 troops. That includes Crimea and European part of Russia. So essentially, and as we indicated recently, this is the number which was continuing from April. So we have like 8 months now of more or less the same situation. That is about on the borders. Inside Russia, we're seeing a formation of the additional troops, which can be or may not be used against Ukraine. So they are certainly getting them formed. They're certainly equipping them. They're certainly preparing them for the some sort of missions. But there is yet no indication that this is going to be used against Ukraine. However, obviously we're following all this data. Plus, they're preparing, as you know, for the exercises in Belarus right now. And the Black Sea exercises in Belarus, we have people who are like recently been to on the border, and they are indicating that yes, the areas around the borders of Ukraine is full of equipment right now. It's like equipment is pretty much everywhere, and the troops are from Belarusian army, and perhaps, well, they couldn't identify, but it could be various. So essentially, yeah, they're getting ready for the exercises.
Like you've got troops then, I mean, and when you look at the maps, you see troops are everywhere. They stretch all the way from Belarus all the way down to the Black Sea. That must be very confusing for the casual observer of this. What is the most, given that kind of formation, what's the most likely scenario that would play out, do you think?
Yeah, I honestly suggest, and our position and position of our organization is that never speculate with scenarios and never go to the particular
predictable, or we don't look into Vladimir Putin's mind, or what's the challenge?
No, it's because the way that, I mean, all the years we've been studying Russian Federation decision-making process, and the decision-making process for Russian Federation is quite complex, and it never had one linear strategy. So they never have situation today, how they want to see it in the future, and then the line in the chain of events which needs to get from point A to point B. They never do that. The reason they never do that is because they're always they're inventing new methods, they're inventing new strategies, they're inventing new tricks, they're playing with the all kind of a hybrid support and a non-military component of their strategy, and and they're playing safe. So right now, especially after 2014. So in order to play safe, you need to see the reaction. They would like to see the reaction of the adversary, and then decide whether they move in this direction or not. We have a whole report of the events which they started and they didn't proceed because it didn't work out. So that means that and this is a fact. So this is like we have enough evidence to say that this is their approach. So that means that they will have a number of options. They will try something, and they will see the reaction. If the reaction is weak, if the people, for example, if it gets along like they planned, then they proceed on the next stage. If that gets along, they proceed to the next stage, and so on and so on. If it doesn't work out, they make a step back, regroup, and do something else. And that something else could be already prepared, or it could take some time to decide. And we sometimes have seen months for them to deciding what to do next. For example, famous kind of a stalemate period of which we even called hostile equilibrium, for the lack of a better word. It was like a second half of 2020, when they really were developing new strategies, new approaches, and so on and so on. And we literally had very little activities, generally speaking, and in the press, and it was almost like dead period. So Yeah, so
Something.
essentially, and it's a very, I mean, we do not recommend anyone to kind of say exactly what they're going to do. So there are chances, there are opportunities, and there are options. So we can say, for example, there are certain possible options. We never go into much detail because again, they're quite creative. So they can come up with some kind of a variance. Even so-called Kiev scenario, which is many people discuss right now, which means the attack on Kiev supposedly on 20th of February. And again, this is a very date just connected to the end of Olympics and end of exercises in Belarus. So there's no other indications that they're going to use that date. But among the community, this date been populated quite a lot. And
If you don't mind me interrupting, let's
Sure,
look at
sure,
the
please go
Belarus
ahead.
situation, because a lot of people
Yeah.
right now are focusing on movement of heavy weaponry into southern Belarus, right along the part of the border that dips down towards Kyiv. You know, there's a little bit of a dagger that goes into Ukraine from Belarus at that point. Is that a vulnerability, and what would how would that play out, do you think?
Well, they will have troops from different sides of Ukraine, from different sides of the border of Ukraine, very close to Kiev, very close to our less protected parts of the border. So certainly, by definition, that's a vulnerability. And again, I would really avoid speculations about how possible it is, because our border guards, our national guard, our armed forces, and so on, they obviously need to prepare for that. Also, their decision-making process so depends on how prepared we are and how ready we are. So readiness is actually a deterrent. Having no readiness is not a deterrent. So, so yes, but generally, by definition, having that many troops close to the border, particularly Belarusian border, which is obviously not protected enough, is a threat. So
yeah, thank you. Yeah. Let me turn to the other panelists for their views on this. Ilya, if you don't mind me asking you, what do you see as being, say, the three most possible scenarios for military action if Russia were to take it? What do you think?
Well, I 99% agree with Andriy Zakharodnyuk, and I'm really glad that he's today with us, because he is delivering very valuable and very important messages to the Ukrainian society right now. Just because, in media, in public discussion, we have so many deliberations, so much of assessment, assumptions, speculations that, we actually give up to emotions rather than, rational thinking about this. So based on what we see, I mean, facts that are reported by the intelligence, by many respected think tanks that analyze the facts, not emotions, I do believe that what we have right here now is the grand and super effective intimidation campaign by the Kremlin with the use of military force and also emotions and speculations in media, the very nature of media.
I think are the most possible scenarios, if you were to guess.
Yes. Like Andriy just said, the military action, the full-fledged military action in some form is probable. Of course, we cannot exclude any variant rule out, but it is possible, but not very likely. Given the fact that we have so many factors that make such a military action so ridiculously costly for this, let's forget about the fact that we are going to face a World War II scale operation or Iraq war style operation. So I believe the most probable scenario for this is that we continue having this crisis in some form for next several months, maybe, because with Moscow making even more ridiculous and absurd aggressive statements and issuing unacceptable demands towards the US and NATO in many ways, because, and this is the thing that is often overlooked in Western media, in many ways it is used for the internal audience within Russia to fuel up the internal propaganda, to keep this war scare, keep the Russian population in fit in this regard. So it's been a historical thing for the Kremlin as the political technology, and I hate to say that they are being pretty effective in fueling this war scare right now.
Thank you, Ilya. So, Sasha, what do you think? So, Ilya seems to think that this could be a bluff. Andrei seems to think that there could be any scenario at play. What do you think are the most likely scenarios in terms of military action? So,
Yeah,
if they did something, what would they be going after?
Yeah, but I can just repeat what I said in the beginning. Actually, I agree that if it would be like that conventional military aggression, it would be highly unlikely. But actually, right now, using that bluff and that coercion on Ukraine, and selling that conception to the West that Minsk agreement is a direct way to peace, Russians can actually, create that preconditions for internal destabilization. Because again, this is their goal. They need internal destabilization. In such case, they can invade, as well as they used, Yanukovych decision to stop European integration, and very natural protest of Ukrainian people, the revolution of dignity, as the trigger, for their own, operations, including their own false flag operations, using disguise of Ukrainian revolutionaries and protesters. So I think that this is the typical, approach to how to conduct that sort of hybrid annexations. We saw that in Kazakhstan just, a couple of weeks ago. It's more or less like that in Belarus. It was like that, in Kyrgyzstan. It was like that even in 1968 in Czechoslovakia. I mean that, and that's why it would be highly unlikely that they would just attack us, in that way. A lot of Westerners believe like just direct, aggression. They never done anything like that before, even in Crimea and even in Donbass. That plausible denial was very important part of their, modus operandi. So that's why, I think that we have to be serious about even military aspects of this threat, and we have to understand that actually Minsk agreement is completely opposite to peace, right? Minsk agreement is a direct way for real huge-scale war in the country.
I'd like to talk about Minsk in a second, but before we go to that, let's talk a little bit about these false flag operations and the kind of pretexts that Russia could use. Andrei, could you go into this idea a little bit? Like, what is Russia most likely to say, or what kind of pretexts do you think Russia might use to be able to justify some kind of military action?
Okay, so may I do a little bit of a correction from the previous statement? I didn't say that all scenarios are likely. Perhaps if I
Mean to mischaracterize you. Go ahead. Yeah.
No worries. It's just a bit clarification. So we do see, we do think. I agree with the previous speakers that the full-scale, large apocalyptic type of invasion, which some of the analysts are projecting all the time. And I have to say, I'm really amazed with some of them, because some analysts, including Western, are projecting the future that the Ukraine is going to fall apart starting from November. And there is no way anything like that happens for like this, because it's obviously who knew what would be American response back in November, who knew what would be the British response, Ukrainian response, and so on and so on. So there were so many unknowns that no serious person could actually say what the future going to look like back in November. And there are there are some forecasts which are going from there. So just need to be very, very careful about that, because indeed it's a huge intimidation campaign, and a substantial information operation takes place as well. Now, what Russians can do to justify the invasion, or justify some, even if it's a limited military invasion, we do believe that they can do. Let me just quickly. We do believe that they can accelerate things in the east. So there could be a substantial acceleration of the hostilities in the east. We do believe that they can come up with some sort of provocation in the Black Sea region and in the Sea of Azov, because it's very cheap for them and it's very inexpensive and they don't need to announce a war to Ukraine to do that. Also, we are having serious considerations about whether some of the troops are going actually to stay in Belarus. Some analysts, which we share the opinion with, believe that it may be the case. So some Russian troops will actually stay in Belarus for a long time. Now, in order to come up with what they call casus belli, they may create some sort of provocation. Most drastic scenarios were including some terrorist act and some kind of a special operation. As you know, Western intelligences, including United States one, were warning us about that scenario, and we're really glad that they warned, because by disclosing you actually deter it. So we're also saying it's possible, though we hope it's not going to be the case. But in the case if anybody's planning that, we need to again to reiterate that yeah, Russians are capable of creating some kind of a event which would cause civilian casualties, and which they can blame and put on Ukraine. Even if the likeness is beyond estimation, let's just say that, because if that happens, God forbid, tomorrow, we know that we weren't, and we said that we expected them to be able to do that. They did that before. We know that very well. They potentially may do this again.
Yeah,
So
let's talk a little bit.
But there are some others. Yeah, please go ahead.
Going to ask about the Russian, Russia tends to talk a lot about the Russian-speaking population, or those in Donbass that have been given passports recently. They talk a lot about protecting those people in Ukraine. Could that be used as an excuse?
Absolutely.
Their protection?
100%, yes. And by the way, recently we had another hybrid, a little hybrid operation. So, for example, in Brussels, there is a think tank which called Friends of Europe, believe it or not, and they have quite a lot of serious people engaged with this think tank. So yesterday they published the report which was saying about the Black Sea crisis, Black Sea situation, and so on and so on. And the report had recommendations, and all recommendations were repeating Russian narratives, all like all of them, like no NATO, Ukraine has to stop pursuing a Russian-speaking population. So pretty big thing. We're going to raise this a lot in Brussels and so on. But they introduced a new term. They used this kind of a terminology of Russian-speaking rebels. So now there is a new kind of a phrase called Russian-speaking rebels, which we haven't seen much before. So we saw rebels, we saw Russian-backed separatists, so and so on. Now they use this. So they kind of are trying to bring this sort of a they kind of project that, frame that image of Russian-speaking population trying to fight against like Ukrainian, whatever it is, speaking population, which is obviously a totally fake construct. But as you know, lots of people in Europe don't know at all what's going on here.
That's the thing. People in Russia,
they may get it,
and many people in Europe don't actually understand. Are these separatists? Are they rebels? Are they, or are they, what? Are they actual people that are supplied and trained and paid by the Russian Federation? How do you correctly describe those people in Donbass and in Crimea who are backed by Russia?
So obviously there is a confusion with this, because originally this was often called in press as Russian-backed separatists, and then whatever else. Trouble is that very often in the press, if you just do a monitoring, the whole Russian-Ukrainian war is often called as Ukrainian crisis, which immediately kind of projects that this is a local problem, this is a general problem, which is not the case. So now let's talk about the facts. The facts are current people who are fighting against Ukraine, they all paid from the Russian budget. That's a proven fact. And all military intelligence of all countries who has a representation in Ukraine agree with that fact. They all are run by the cadre officers from the regular army, seconded to those formations, which is Army Corps 1, Army Corps 2. They all are part of the Russian chain of command. And that's a fact as well, because we know that the key decisions, strategic decisions, are actually not made in Donetsk or Lugansk, they're made in Moscow. The guys who are seconded, they give out the documents, they receive temporarily documents, and then they come back, return the documents, they receive the original ones. So basically, what is also important is that the fact, while they are away from Russia during that mission, it's still calculated as their service years. So it's not like they took a vacation. It's like they were literally seconded to the different formation and then come back, and their pensions, their social benefits, and so on, they were like without that interruption, which means that the Russian government considers them as continuing service. By all these facts, we can say that all these formations are clearly part of the Russian chain, Russian command. So they could be called the Russian proxy troops, or Russian hybrid troops, which is now a phrase which is used by Ministry of Defense, or Russian troops, simply as that.
All the howitzers and tanks that are in Donbass are Russian. they could come from nowhere else. And a Russian court
Well,
has
we
even
have a
recognized
clear
that
list.
there are soldiers
Yeah, of course,
in
we
Donbass,
have a
yes.
list what happened there when the war started. And believe me, miraculously, they've been appearing over more and more and more and more of that equipment. So obviously, that region never been that populated much with equipment. So yes, equipment came from Russian mainland, and we have countless documented facts that that was the case. Again, all military intelligences of all European countries and all countries which have representations in Ukraine do not dispute that fact for long time.
Do you call them proxies? Is that the correct term to use?
No, we call them Russian. No, we call them Russian army. We call them Russian hybrid forces, and we call them Russian mercenaries sometimes, depending.
Okay.
And yes, sometimes we call them Russian proxies. Yes, as well.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. Thank you. So let me just ask this. So it seems you seem to be stating that the situation is very similar to what it was in earlier this year, in early 2021 in the spring. Does that mean that you disagree somewhat with the U.S. intelligence that has said, no, this particular threat is very, very concerning?
No, threat is more complex than just number of people at the border. So when you analyze threat, you obviously analyze lots of different indicators, and there are, in military intelligence, there is a methodology which is quite similar, and in NATO countries, it's also very similar methodology by understanding indicators of readiness to start the campaign, and they have lots of different parts. I mean, it's a readiness of logistics forces. Is where the fuel, where's the food, where's the medical supplies, where the hospitals, where the how the people were trained, and so on and so on. So there are like direct military indicators, and then separately there are like additional auxiliary indicators. For example, how they prepare local population, whether they conduct information campaign, because we do know that war will be very, if it takes place, it will be extended war, obviously, because we have war from 2014. But in extended version, it's going to be extremely unpopular with the Russian population. They have no idea why they should fight. For what's the reason? I mean, what's happening? They don't understand that. And that's why we were so scared that they will do something really terrible in order to justify that. And that's why we were repeating about this possible terrorist attack scenario, because they do need to really change their people's opinion. We have people right now who are watching Russian TV all day long and just recording it and analyzing it. And I don't envy them, obviously, but this is what they do. And currently, we do not see a very significant propaganda justifying invasion scenario yet. So obviously, about Ukraine is constantly negative, constantly setting up negative kind of a image of Ukraine and so on and so on. But there is no speaking about something really bad which would justify this. So this is like additional indicators. But again, we do consider a threat of local acceleration of hostilities as high. We do not we consider the threat of a large invasion of full scale, which would aim capturing, invading like half of the country as a low probability at the moment. Situation is dynamic, watching it, maybe, who knows, maybe we'll in a time we'll update our position.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I know it's you have to go because it's 5:30, but I want to give you, I want to thank you for coming on the show today, and good luck with your work.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, good luck to everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Andrei.
Good to see you guys.
Ilya, you're from Donbass. What's your answer to this question about what we call the people in the Donbass? What is the correct term from your point of view?
I'm not just from Donbass. I'm also a journalist working in the English language newspaper and trying to be honest and accurate about things that we have in my homeland. So we have a pretty strict wording policy towards naming names. And in this regard, we almost always say something like Russian-led militants is a standard term for this. It could be Russian-backed proxies or Russian-led, but militants. But we do not obviously never call them rebels. That's 100%. So we always make clear that these are the forces that are organized, led, financed, commanded, and supplied by the Russian Federation and fully controlled. while
Any
Russian
other?
Federation.
Thank you, Ilya. So, Sasha, are there any other scenarios that we should be looking for if there's an incursion of some sort?
I think that it's very important to understand how to assess that threats actually properly. I already mentioned that actually because hybrid, threats are multidimensional, and it means that we have some military threats, some, diplomatic, economical, information, etc., and we have to actually see all of the processes to get the full picture. But at the same time, we have to understand, three very traditional components of the threat. So intent, opportunity, and capabilities, right? And from this point of view, if you can see that hybrid capabilities as well, created by Russians maybe a long time before, and you can see how these Russian tools are used to create some opportunities. In such case, you can at least understand that Russians could have that intent. I already, mentioned in the beginning of the of our meeting. So I think that for now, this idea with internal destabilization of Ukraine using Minsk agreement as a trigger, it's probably one of the most, desirable scenarios, because again, it would create the opportunity for them to support and make violent, people's protests against that.
Mm-hmm.
It would create the window of opportunity for the agents who, unfortunately, including Russian citizens, are here in Ukraine. Some of them used to serve in Ukrainian, military. Some of them are active members of Ukrainian far-right groups. So they could use that people as a flag for their own operations. And I think that without that decapitation operations, without assassinations of key leaders of the country, and without that, sabotage of military and political command and control system, actually there is no way to achieve, that military goals as well. Because in such case, they would claim that we have Nazi coup in Kiev, we have no president of the country, we have direct threat for Russian-speaking population of, eastern part of Ukraine. Russians would invade in such case without any risk to be punished for that. Even more, they could actually start, some sort of negotiations about sending UN peacekeepers into the central part of Ukraine. And honestly, that was something they tried to do even in 2014. They failed, but again, even during the Orange Revolution, that was the original idea,
So let me unpack that and make sure I understand that correctly. You're saying that they could use other people. They could use even far right
yeah, I can
they could instigate a coup by those people,
yeah,
and then use that as a justification to come in on top of them.
Absolutely, yeah, it's absolutely right. And I can provide one very simple, example. So one of the most, vocal and crazy representatives of pro-Russian party in the parliament is Ilya Kyva. Ilya Kyva is very, anti-Ukrainian, anti-American, anti-Western, MP right now.
A member of the pro-Russian the opposition party.
Opposition, yeah, but just a few years ago, he was a prominent, member and leader of the right sector, and actually he changed that mind just in one day. And from my point of view, this is the serious, evidence that from the very beginning he was just an infiltrator into the right sector to do that false flag stuff, because he was very, brutal in his, statements about what should be done to Russians, to Russian-speaking Ukrainians, despite he actually was Russian-speaking Ukrainian himself.
So this could be, if I understand correctly, you could see a false flag operation that didn't have anything to do with Russia at all. That Russia then
if you don't understand the affiliation of that members of Ukrainian veterans organizations and Ukrainian far-right groups, yes, if you don't understand that these people, they are not just former Russian citizens, but they are assets of Russian secret services, and they actually don't even need to do anything. Russia needs them just to take responsibility for that activities. That could claim that this is not Russian SF troops here. This is right sector, this is Ukrainian patriots, and they just do that revenge because Zelensky started, that Minsk process, which is direct betrayal of national interest. Something like that.
Okay, that's an interesting and very concerning scenario.
Absolutely, yeah.
Ilya, what do you think about this? what other scenarios could you envision? Or let me ask, what could people do to inoculate themselves against that kind of scenario so that they understood what was really going on?
I'll be speaking as someone from Donbass and someone who knows, the mindset of my people in there. We all talking about this possible false flag operation by Russia to justify, to give it status, give it a casus belli against Ukraine under humanitarian pretext. Yeah, but to be honest, yes, again, it's probable. We were talking about the possible chemical weapons used, the pretended chemical weapons used against the Ukrainian population in Donbass. But then again, I do not consider this highly probable, just because, gone are the days, and I'm talking about the mindset of regular people in Donbass, gone are the days when it was very easy to persuade, to sell this this idea of justifying the war against Ukraine to regular people. Even I guess even in Russians, yeah, they do bombard people with propaganda all the time on TV news, but it's been 8 years of war, and there's a special thing about people in Donbass is that they tend to lean towards the side where life is better, in to put it simply. So after all these years of war, I think most of the people in my homeland, they do see this and do understand this, even though they do not often admit this, is that what was started in 2014 did not justify the whole thing war. I mean, except for very large minority. So what we ended up having is this huge destruction and poverty and the occupation of 2 cities and life standards that are better in the Ukrainian part of the Donbass, Ukrainian controlled part of the Donbass, than in Russian occupation. So basically, I can tell you from my own experience of talking to my relatives, because the whole of my family is in Donbass. So yeah, Ukraine is kind of bad. Ukraine is kind of having a war, but when these people have a chance, they will simply get their foreign IDs and go to see Poland under a non-visa regime, to see foreign land for the first time. So if it makes them feel better to be a loyal Ukrainian citizens, they will be loyal Ukrainian citizens. So I do not see for Russians a lot of chances, a lot of possibilities to sell a real big war against Ukraine with the use of false flag operation in Donbass or against Russian-speaking population, because back in 2014 we were talking about the pretty local war, and war that was something new, back in the day. But like I said, it's been 8 years. So just to summarize, I expect to be much more probable lots of other instruments that are far less politically complicated and far less vulnerable, far less painful for in terms of backlash upon the Kremlin itself, like cyber attacks, instigating hate inside Ukraine, political instability, private political leaders, supporting pro-Russian opposition. So there's so many instruments way better and more effective than conventional World War II style warfare in this year. So I consider these scenarios way more possible and likely.
See, interesting.
Now,
go
if
ahead.
I may, I didn't mention actually any chemical attacks or casus belli. Actually, the single false flag operation I mentioned was that false flag Nazi coup in Kiev. Actually, that was the idea. Again,
that was not about your words. That was about the Shoigu's words about the American chemical weapons in Donbass.
Yeah.
I was referring to that thing.
Yeah, thank you. I totally agree with you. I think that there is no way to use any Ukrainian citizens to be engaged in that violent activities against the government. Even here in Kiev, I think for political destabilization, what Russians need is just some sort of huge protests, and they would make them violent for a very short period of time. Because if this is false flag coup, not false flag revolution, it means that all of the decapitation acts could be conducted in less than 1 day, and in such case people will have no time, to understand what's going on, especially, our foreign partners who are already confused. We will have no real, leadership in the country. We will probably have very limited ability to share, any information, because it would be like in Kazakhstan, no, internet, no, at least mobile internet, because we understand the vulnerabilities of Ukrainian mobile communications, because a significant part of them are under Russian control still, unfortunately. Yeah, and I believe that this is at least what they're trying to do right now. And you're absolutely right that actually in such case, it wouldn't be even sort of real military operation, because again, with all my respect to, brave men and women of Ukraine, there is no chance to organize any serious, defense without general staff, and single system of command and control and logistics and everything. Without that, Russians can do a lot, and we understand that right now, for instance, in some of the regions, including Kharkiv, for instance, we just don't have enough troops, to stop them, and they don't need, anything else. They will need probably Kharkiv, Dnipro, Mykolaiv, and Odessa. But at the same time, I still think that this is miscalculation of the situation, and that was the miscalculation from the very beginning, because even if Russia would achieve all of that goals, and unfortunately it's possible, right? They would face, much more serious resistance than they faced, in Donbass in 2014. Unorganized resistance that, self-organized, guerrilla and self-organized underground, groups of people who started, attacking block posts, and Russian troops in the summer of 2014. So in Kharkiv, it would be, and you know that, I believe, as well as I do, that in Kharkiv it would be complete different atmosphere. So that's why if Russians would be serious, and if they would, actually prepare proper cost benefits analysis, they would probably stop that operations. But unfortunately, they did a lot of stupid things, including, invasion of Ukraine in 2014 and annexation of Crimea.
That's right.
So that's why we have to admit that unfortunately, despite they are very smart and very professional, they have some probably psychological problems we are not able to explain.
Ilya, do you agree that this fight would be bloody if Russia did come into Ukraine?
I most definitely agree that even if we have any sort of military action against Ukraine, we are far more prepared to such a thing than we were like 8-9 years ago. Because we have proven the ability to self-mobilize, the general population, and self-mobilize into volunteer.
Ready to fight.
Volunteer. No, we have proved this ability back in 2014 during the very local war. Obviously the armed forces are still very far from being perfect, but
we have to go to our breakout sessions, and I hate to interrupt, but let me just ask one final quick question for 30 seconds. Is the Ukrainian army, are the Ukrainian armed forces better prepared than they were in 2014? And are they capable of fighting, defending the country against this massive group of troops on the border?
Well, that's definitely true. The armed forces are in a way better shape than 8 years ago, even though it's riddled with lots of troubles and problems like bureaucracy, like messy organization, poor conditions of service, and many other things. But one of the things that I have seen in Donbass for all these 8 years is that this military keeps standing, holding the line for 8 years without any prospect of military victory, of any chance to succeed, but they keep doing the job. They are motivated enough not to, destabilize and demoralize, which is a rare thing in the military. And let's not forget about lots of veterans in the rear. So
yes, Sasha, final word: is the Ukrainian army, Ukrainian armed forces, are they ready?
Yeah, they're absolutely ready, and I believe that without disorganization of system of command and control, Russians have no chances, even with all of their troops actually they have on our borders.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we're going to wrap now and go to our breakout groups. I'd like to thank the panelists. Andriy Zagorodnyuk, former Minister of Defense, who had to leave a few minutes ago. Sasha Danylyuk, the chief advisor for Ukraine's Minister of Defense, former chief advisor, and Ilya Ponomarenko, a columnist and a reporter with the Kyiv Independent newspaper. Thank you all very much. See you next time.